It all started with a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I had just come back from running errands when I heard my wife, Sarah, and my sister, Jessica, whispering in the kitchen. "What are we going to tell him?" Sarah's voice was shaky. Jessica snapped. "That his wife slept with his sister? That his child isn't even his?" I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. Did I just hear that? Sarah whispered back, "I don't know, Jess. I don't know what to do." Before I could step in, Sarah's phone rang, cutting their conversation short. Moments later, they walked out, smiling like nothing had happened. "Hey, Han," Sarah said, kissing me on the cheek. "You're back early." I forced a smile, my mind racing. What the hell did they mean? His child isn't even his? Well, let's start from the beginning. Hi, my name is Ethan. I'm 34 years old, and I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 3 years. We have a 1-year-old son, Liam, who's the center of my universe. I met Sarah 6 years ago at a friend's barbecue. She was beautiful in a classic, understated way. Freckles on her nose, long auburn hair, and this easy laugh that drew people in. But what really struck me about her wasn't her looks. It was her confidence. She carried herself like she knew exactly what she wanted from life and wasn't afraid to go after it. Of course, no one's perfect, and Sarah was no exception. She could be a little too rigid about some things, always wanting everything planned down to the last detail. Spontaneity wasn't her thing. She'd make a checklist for a weekend picnic if you let her. And sometimes her ambition bordered on impatience. If something or someone wasn't moving at her pace, she'd get frustrated. Still, I admired her drive and focus. Then there's my stepsister, Jessica. She's 2 years younger than me, but honestly, she's always been the more disciplined one. Jessica is the type of person who sets 5 alarms in the morning and wakes up before the first one even rings. She's strict with herself, fiercely independent, and not the kind to ask for help unless she has no other choice. Her independence is something I've always admired, even if it sometimes made her hard to read. She was always responsible growing up, the one who did her chores without being asked, who saved her allowance instead of blowing it on candy like I did. But Jessica isn't exactly ordinary. She has these odd hobbies, like collecting antique lockpicks or learning how to play obscure musical instruments. And she's surprisingly good at all of it. It's just part of who she is, I guess. Though I suppose that's not surprising considering she has a secret no one else knows about. A couple of years ago, Jessica went through a rough patch. She lost her job and broke up with her boyfriend of 4 years. She needed somewhere to stay, and I didn't think twice about offering our guest room. She's my sister, after all. First, everything seemed fine. Sarah and Jessica hit it off surprisingly well. They'd binge-watch shows together, swap recipes, and even team up to give me a hard time about my terrible taste in music. I thought it was great. Sarah had someone to lean on while I was traveling for work, and Jessica seemed to be finding her footing again. But over time, things started to feel strange. They'd disappear into the greenhouse for hours, claiming they were repotting plants. Sometimes, I'd walk into a room and feel the air change, like I'd interrupted something. They'd glance at each other, then at me, and suddenly whatever they'd been talking about would stop. I chalked it up to them bonding, but now I wonder if I was just too blind or too trusting to see the bigger picture. At first, I didn't think much of the little things. I mean, Sarah and Jessica were spending a lot of time together. Sure. But that wasn't unusual. They both enjoyed working in the greenhouse, and Jessica was strict about keeping her routine while living with us. Maybe their friendship was just the natural result of living under the same roof. But as time went on, I started noticing patterns I couldn't ignore. For one, they seemed to spend more time together when I wasn't around. When I left for work in the morning, they'd wave me off cheerfully. But by the time I came home, they'd retreat to another room. Sometimes it was the greenhouse, other times Sarah's home office. They'd stay in there for hours, their voices barely audible. Then there were the small excuses. Sarah would cancel our plans last minute, saying she had already promised Jessica they'd go see some new movie or check out a pop-up art exhibit. I didn't mind at first. Sarah deserved some downtime, and I figured she was just trying to help Jessica feel more at home. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. It was the way their laughter would suddenly stop when I walked into the room. Or the way they'd exchange a quick glance, almost as if they were silently deciding what not to say in front of me. One night, I came home early from a business dinner, and the house was unusually quiet. I walked into the living room and found them sitting together on the couch, their faces lit by the soft glow of the TV. Jessica had a blanket draped over her legs, and Sarah was leaning in, whispering something that made them both laugh. They didn't notice me at first, and for a moment I just stood there watching. It wasn't that they were doing anything overtly suspicious. It was the intimacy of it, the way they seemed to exist in their own little bubble. When Sarah finally looked up and saw me, her smile faltered just slightly before she said, "Hey, you're home early." Jessica didn't even turn around. She just kept her eyes on the screen, her lips twitching in what might have been a smirk. It was a small moment, but it gnawed at me. Another time, I overheard Sarah on the phone with Jessica while I was in the next room. She was laughing about something, her tone warm and teasing. "You're terrible," she said, her voice dropping to a playful whisper. "But I love it." When she saw me standing in the doorway, she quickly ended the call. "Just catching up with Jess," she said, too casually. That was when I realized I wasn't imagining things. I started to pay closer attention, piecing together every odd glance, every hushed conversation, every moment of tension that vanished the second I entered the room. Something was happening between them. I didn't know what it was yet, but I was determined to find out. I couldn't take it anymore. The glances, the whispers, the laughter that stopped whenever I walked into the room. It all added up to something, and I needed to know what. One evening, after dinner, I decided to confront Sarah directly. Liam was already asleep, and Jessica had gone out, leaving the two of us alone in the house. "Sarah," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk." She looked up from her phone, her brow furrowing. "What about?" I sat down across from her, folding my hands to keep from clenching them. "It's about you and Jessica. I feel like something's going on, and I think I deserve to know what it is." Her expression froze for a moment, then softened into something careful. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone measured. I let out a breath. "You two have been spending so much time together, sneaking off, whispering. You cancel plans with me for her. And honestly, feels like you're hiding something." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Ethan, come on. She's your sister. We've just gotten close, that's all. You should be happy about that, not suspicious." "Close," I repeated, my voice hardening. "Close doesn't explain the way you look at each other, or why you always stop talking when I walk into the room. I'm not stupid, Sarah. I know something's going on." For a moment, she didn't respond. Her fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the coffee table, her eyes darting toward the window as though looking for an escape. Finally, she sighed and said, "It's not what you think." "Then tell me," I pressed, leaning forward. "Because right now I don't know what to think. And I'm not leaving this alone until you're honest with me." Her face crumpled slightly, and she hesitated, biting her lip as if trying to decide whether to speak. "It started on Halloween," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I blinked, caught off guard. "Halloween? What are you talking about?" She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding my eyes. "You remember the costumes?" "What costumes?" I asked, though the knot in my stomach was growing tighter. "You and Jessica both dressed up as Batman. Same outfit, same mask. I was upstairs, waiting for you to come back from your shower, and someone came into the room. I thought it was you." I stared at her, my chest tightening. "And?" Her cheeks flushed as she continued. "I kissed them, thinking it was you. And then, it went further. I didn't realize it wasn't you until you walked into the room afterward, acting like nothing had happened." For a moment I couldn't speak. My mind reeled, trying to process what she was saying. "So you're telling me you thought Jessica was me?" Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't know. I didn't think. I just assumed." "And when you realized it wasn't me?" I pressed, my voice sharp. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "I didn't know how to tell you." A cold fury burned in my chest. So you let it happen. You let this start between you two, and you never thought I'd find out. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice cracking. Ethan, I swear, it wasn't supposed to happen again. But it did, and I cut her off. You and Jessica. My own sister. She didn't deny it. Her silence was confirmation enough. I couldn't look at Sarah for the rest of the night. Her confession replayed in my mind, over and over, until I could barely think straight. My wife, my sister, together. After confronting Sarah, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Her vague confessions, her guilty silence. It all pointed to Jessica. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from my wife. When Jessica got back later that night, I waited for her in the kitchen. She raised an eyebrow when she saw me, her usual confidence faltering for just a second. That was all I needed to confirm what I already suspected. I told her we needed to talk, and to my surprise, she didn't argue. She just sat down, folded her hands, and listened as I demanded an explanation. That's when she dropped the bombshell. So, yeah, I remember saying to myself later, still trying to process what I'd learned. Our parents met when she was 20 and I was 22. That's how we ended up becoming family. Jessica wasn't my biological sister. She was my stepsister. I'd known that for years. But what I didn't know, what I never even suspected, was that Jessica wasn't who she claimed to be at all. Looking back now, I realize how seamlessly she fit into my family back then. She was always confident, fiercely independent, and unapologetically herself. We bonded quickly, laughing over stupid jokes and finding common ground in our shared love for strategy games and bad action movies. Not even for a second did I suspect the truth. That truth was revealed the night Jessica admitted her feelings for Sarah. She explained how it started not with Halloween but months lately on an ordinary evening. Sarah had been taking a bath, and Jessica had walked in by accident. She froze when she saw Sarah in the water, steam curling around her bare shoulders. Jessica claimed she'd meant to leave, but something stopped her. She couldn't look away. They started talking, light, casual conversation at first, but Sarah didn't tell her to leave. That, Jessica said, was the moment everything changed. Eventually, Jessica leaned in and kissed her. She admitted that she was testing the waters, seeing if Sarah would pull away. But instead of pulling away, Sarah kissed her back. Jessica said she hadn't planned for any of it to happen, but when Sarah didn't stop her, things escalated. That's when the truth came out. Jessica wasn't Jessica at all. She was biologically male, a fact she'd hidden from almost everyone, including me. For years, she had lived as a woman, fully embracing the identity she felt most comfortable with. But that night, standing in front of Sarah, the secret slipped out. According to Jessica, Sarah didn't react the way most people might. She wasn't angry or shocked. Instead, she asked one question. So it was you that night? Jessica didn't deny it. That's how it all started. As I sat there listening to her story, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, confusion, betrayal. They all swirled together, leaving me numb. This wasn't just a betrayal of my trust. It was a betrayal of our family. And yet, as furious as I was, I couldn't stop thinking about what this meant for Liam. The next morning, I overheard something that changed everything. I was heading downstairs, still groggy from a restless night, when I heard their voices in the kitchen. I stopped at the bottom of the staircase, my foot hovering over the last step as their words drifted into the hallway. What are we going to tell him? Sarah's voice was shaky, almost frantic. Jessica snapped back, her tone cutting and impatient. That his wife slept with his sister? That his child isn't even his? I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart pounded in my chest, so loud I thought they might hear it. Did I just hear that right? Sarah whispered something back, but I couldn't catch it. I leaned forward, straining to hear over the rush of blood in my ears. I don't know, Jess, she said finally, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do. Jessica let out a frustrated sigh. Well, you better figure it out fast. He's not an idiot, Sarah. He's going to put the pieces together sooner or later. Couldn't breathe. My body felt like it had turned to stone, rooted to the spot. My sister and my wife, they were talking about me. About Liam. About a betrayal so huge I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. Just stay calm, Jessica continued, her tone softening slightly. We'll handle this. One step at a time. Sarah sounded almost desperate. Jess, I can't handle this. Not anymore. You don't have a choice, Jessica replied, her voice icy. Now pull yourself together before he hears something. My mind raced, struggling to make sense of what I just heard. My sister and my wife had done something that involved Liam. And now they were trying to figure out how to keep me in the dark. I stayed frozen in the hallway until I heard Sarah's footsteps heading toward the stairs. I turned quickly, pretending to check my phone, my heart still hammering in my chest. She smiled at me as she passed, her expression tight and forced. Good morning, hon. Sleep okay? Yeah. I lied, barely able to look at her. Jessica stayed in the kitchen and I didn't dare go in there. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. But one thing was clear. Whatever trust one had left in either of them was gone. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a war zone. Sarah and Jessica weren't avoiding me anymore. How could they, when everything was already out in the open? Every glance was charged, every word spoken under pressure. The betrayal had been exposed, and now we were all living in the wreckage. I wasn't interested in hearing their excuses anymore. Sarah had tried over and over to explain herself, to apologize, to beg for some kind of understanding. Jessica, meanwhile, carried herself with a kind of cold detachment, as if she were above it all, watching from a distance. But she wasn't above anything. She was the cause of this chaos, and I wasn't about to let her forget it. The night after I overheard them in the kitchen, I laid it out plainly. We're doing a DNA test for Liam, I said, my voice sharp, cutting through the thick silence. Sarah froze where she stood, her eyes wide.
Ethan, no.
Please, you don't have to do that. He's your son. I swear to you. Swear to me. I snapped, stepping closer. Do you even understand how ridiculous that sounds right now? Your word means nothing. You've lied to me about everything. And until I have proof, I'm not believing a damn thing you say. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked to Jessica for support. Jessica leaned back against the wall, her arms crossed. If you think a test will make you feel better, fine. Do it. But you already know the truth, Ethan. You don't need a test for that. Her smugness was like gasoline on a fire. I stepped toward her, my jaw tight. Don't you dare sit there and act like you know what I need. You've done enough. Jessica didn't flinch, didn't react, but I saw the faint twitch in her jaw, a crack in her composure. Ethan, please, Sarah said, her voice breaking. You don't understand. Liam is yours. I know he's yours. I turned to her, shaking my head. You think I'm going to take your word for it after everything? After this? I gestured between her and Jessica, my voice rising. You've destroyed everything, Sarah. Everything. And now you want me to just trust you. I never stopped loving you, she said, her voice trembling. I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. But Liam is your son. I swear he is. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. A mistake? You don't get to call this a mistake. This was a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to destroy our family. And now I'm supposed to believe you. The room was suffocating with tension. Sarah was crying, Jessica was stone-faced, and I was barely holding back the rage boiling inside me. I've already ordered the test, I said finally, my voice cold. It's happening, and once we have the results, we'll figure out where to go from there. Jessica shrugged, pushing off the wall. Fine, do whatever you need to do, but don't act like you're the only victim here. I turned on her, my voice sharp. The only victim? You slept with my wife. You lied to me, And now you have the audacity to act like you're the one who's been wronged? Get out of my face, Jess. I'm done with you. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She didn't argue, just walked out of the room without another word. Sarah stayed, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded one last time. Ethan, I love you. Please don't give up on us. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Instead, I walked away, leaving her sobbing in the middle of the room. The test was coming, and with it, the truth. And no matter what the results said, nothing would ever be the same again. The day the DNA test results arrived, the air in the house was thicker than ever. Sarah avoided my eyes, but I could feel her watching me as I opened the envelope. Jessica was sitting across the room, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. I unfolded the paper and scanned the results, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely think. There it was, printed in black and white, a 50% match. My mind reeled. What did this even mean? Was Liam mine? Was he Jessica's? The results didn't make sense. Ethan? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, hesitant and full of fear. I looked up at her, my throat dry. It says there's a 50% match, I said slowly, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense if I spoke them carefully enough. What the hell does that mean? Jessica leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. For the first time, there was a crack in her confidence. It means he's related to both of us. The realization hit me like a freight train. Related to both of us. Liam was biologically connected to me and Jessica. He's my nephew, I said, my voice low, the words heavy. Or he's your son. Sarah started crying, her hands covering her face. Ethan, I swear. I thought he was yours. I didn't know. I didn't. You didn't know? I snapped, the anger rising like a tidal wave. You didn't know whose child you were carrying? How the hell does that happen, Sarah? I didn't want to believe it, she sobbed. I thought if I just pushed it out of my mind, it would go away. I thought you'd never find out. Push it out of your mind? I repeated, my voice cold and sharp. You thought you could just ignore the possibility that he wasn't mine? You were playing games with my life, with his life. Jessica finally spoke, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. You can do another test. One that compares his DNA to mine and yours. That'll tell us for sure. I turned to her, my anger now squarely on her. And why the hell should I trust you? You've lied to me about everything. You destroyed my family. You think I'm just going to take your word for it now? She didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. Do the test, she said simply. If it clears this up, then you'll know for sure. I didn't respond. My hands were shaking as I folded the paper back into the envelope. The results had answered nothing, only added more questions. Sarah tried to reach for me, her voice breaking. Ethan, please, don't let this destroy us. We can fix this. We can. Stop, I said sharply, pulling away from her. You don't get to beg for forgiveness now. Not after this. Not after what you've done. She collapsed into tears again, and I walked out of the room, leaving her and Jessica behind. I needed to get out of the house, to think, to breathe. The truth wasn't clear yet, but one thing was certain. My family was shattered, and there was no going back. The second DNA test was inevitable. After the first test came back with that 50% match, there was no other option. It wasn't just for me, it was for Liam. He deserved to know the truth about who his father really was. Submitting the samples was clinical, straightforward, but the emotions surrounding it were anything but. I swabbed Liam's cheek while Sarah watched, tears streaming down her face. She didn't say a word, and I didn't offer any comfort. Couldn't. Jessica's sample was next. She didn't resist. In fact, she seemed resigned, almost indifferent, as though the outcome didn't matter to her anymore. I collected my own sample last, sealed everything in the envelope, and sent it off the same day. Now all I could do was wait. The waiting was unbearable, filled with tension that hung in the air like a storm about to break. Sarah and Jessica's behavior shifted. Less defensive now, more subdued. as though the weight of what they'd done had finally hit them. Sarah hovered, always nearby but never saying much. She tried to be helpful, cleaning up the house, cooking meals, but every movement screamed of desperation. She was trying to prove something, to me, to herself, but it was too late for that. Jessica was the opposite. She retreated into herself, barely speaking or even looking at me. Her usual confidence had crumbled, replaced by a quiet that felt almost like defeat. The days dragged on. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office just to avoid the suffocating tension at home. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, my thoughts always returned to that envelope, traveling through the mail to some lab where strangers would decide the fate of my family. I couldn't stop wondering what the results would say. If Liam was mine, I'd still be left with the knowledge that his mother and my sister had betrayed me in ways I couldn't begin to forgive. If he wasn't mine, I didn't know what I'd do. The thought of losing him, the boy I'd held, fed, soothed to sleep, was unbearable. But there was no escaping the truth. The results would come, and when they did, there would be no more questions. Just answers, no matter how devastating they might be. The second DNA test results arrived faster than I expected, though the days of waiting felt like an eternity. When I saw the envelope in the mailbox, my hands trembled as I reached for it. I stood there for a moment, the paper heavy in my grip, before heading back inside. I didn't open it in front of Sarah or Jessica. This wasn't for them, it was for me. I locked myself in my office, closed the blinds, and sat down at the desk, staring at the envelope for what felt like hours. Then, finally, I tore it open. The results were clear. Liam wasn't mine. I sank back in my chair, the paper slipping from my hands. It was over. Every part of the life I thought I had was gone. My wife had betrayed me with my sister. No, my stepbrother. And the son I thought was mine wasn't my son at all. When I finally stepped out of the office, Sarah was waiting, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked at me, searching for answers in my expression, but I didn't say a word. I just walked past her, into the kitchen, and poured myself a drink. She followed me, her voice shaking. "Ethan, please, say something. Anything." I turned to her, my voice cold and flat. "Liam isn't mine." Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the counter for support, her sobs breaking the silence of the house. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her face pale but her posture rigid. For once, she didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. The next few days were a blur. I packed my things and moved out of the house, leaving Sarah and Jessica to deal with the wreckage they'd created. Sarah begged me not to leave, crying and pleading, but I was done. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Not with them, not with the memories of what they'd done. Divorce papers followed shortly after. Sarah tried to fight it at first, claiming she wanted to save our marriage for Liam's sake. But even she had to admit there was nothing left to save. She signed the papers eventually, her tears staining the page. As for Jessica, I cut her out of my life completely. Whatever bond we'd shared as siblings was gone. She tried to apologize once, leaving a long, rambling voicemail about how she never meant for things to go this far, how she still cared about me, but I didn't listen to the whole thing. I deleted it and blocked her number. The hardest part was Liam. Walking away from him felt like ripping out a piece of my soul. He wasn't my biological son, but he was the boy I'd held in my arms as a baby, the boy whose first steps I cheered for, whose laughter had brightened even the darkest days. I arranged for visitation rights, though it wasn't easy. Legally, I had no claim to him, but Sarah agreed to let me stay in his life, probably out of guilt more than anything else. Every time I saw him, I felt the ache of what I'd lost, but I couldn't bring myself to let go completely. Months turned into a year. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and slowly began to rebuild my life. The pain didn't go away, but it dulled with time, becoming something I could carry without breaking under its weight. Sarah and Jessica? They stayed behind, living in the same house where everything had fallen apart. I didn't keep tabs on them, but from what little I heard through mutual friends, they didn't last long. Their relationship, built on lies and betrayal, crumbled under the pressure of what they'd done. The last I heard, Sarah was trying to piece her life back together, while Jessica had disappeared entirely. Looking back now, I've come to realize something. Betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships. It destroys the person you thought you were. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself you don't want to see. The blind trust, the missed signs, the willingness to believe in people who didn't deserve it. But betrayal also teaches you something. It shows you who you can become when everything falls apart. It shows you the strength you didn't know you had, the resilience you never thought you'd need. I don't regret learning the truth, even though it broke me, because in the end, the truth set me free. And now, I'm living a life built on something real, on honesty, on trust, on the hard lessons I've learned. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to it.